Follow along in this intermediate flow dedicated to improving your hip internal rotation. Hip internal rotation is usually the articulation of the hip that is the most difficult to find, understand, and improve. So we'll spend a lot of time in that internal rotation with passive ranges, active ranges, holds, and trying to go in and out of that articulation. So all you'll need is a yoga block. And it's ideal that you're comfortable in the 90-90 position, or at least comfortable in a variation of 90-90 where you're elevated on something like a yoga block here with some support, or something underneath that front leg, or both. So we'll be starting in that 90-90 position, yoga block if you need, but if you don't, if you're comfortable in that 90-90, we'll just be starting here. So in our 90-90, we want the hips at 90 degrees. We want the legs extended at 90 degrees. So left leg is going to be right in front of my left hip. That knee is bent at 90 degrees. That left foot is flexed. My right leg is straight out from my right hip. Knee is bent at 90 degrees, and that foot is flexed. So we want to sit nice and tall in this position, both knees driving down into the floor to create stability in the spine. Then we're going to stretch into our internal rotation. So our internal rotation is our trail leg. This leg is an external rotation. This leg is an internal rotation. Now let's intensify it. So you're going to intensify it by bringing that right hip down towards the floor and rotating your body towards that right leg. We're going to do some kinetic stretching. So we're going into this deep range of motion, and then we're going to push out of it. So try to get a little deeper into this range of motion. We'll stay here a little longer for this first rep. So as I'm rotating into this internal rotation, I'm going to turn this way. My hip is dropping towards the floor. I'm turning my chest towards my right knee, and I'm going to try to grab onto my right heel or the floor close to that right heel with my right hand. So I'm really rotating and twisting that hip towards that right thigh. And then what I'm going to do is pull my pull my left hand onto that right thigh to pull myself even further. So you should feel a deep stretch right here in the hip capsule. So if you're feeling that very tight stretch there, that's totally normal. Keep feeling that stretch and embrace it. And then we're going to push that foot down into the floor. So actively pushing down, lifting that hip away to come out of that deep internal rotation position back into our 90-90. So let's do that again. You're going to drive that hip down, find that passive range. And as you do that, almost think about lifting this foot and shin towards the chest. So we're actively pulling further into that stretch. You'll feel almost crampiness feeling on the outer part of that right hip. Then you're going to drive that heel down into the floor. Glutes are squeezing, bringing that right hip forward to come back up. Let's do that 3 more times, pulling into that stretch. And as you're doing that, the hip is going down, but the leg is trying to lift up at the same time. And then exhale, push down to rotate back forward. Last 2, pulling into that stretch. Each time, seeing if you can go a little further into that stretch. Exhale, push down to come back out of it. And let's go one more time, pulling into that stretch. Now let's stay here a little bit longer again on this last rep, and we're going to work some isometrics. So we're going to try to lengthen the floor between those 2 feet and knees. And then we're going to try to shorten the floor. So notice as you shorten that floor, you're going to feel that stretch a little bit more. That right hip is going to pull back from that right knee. And then let's lengthen again, pulling that floor apart between the 2 feet. And push. Let's lengthen one more time, pulling apart, and then slowly come out of that by pushing that right foot down into the floor. Let's continue with this right leg. So now let's activate that internal rotation a little bit more. If you need to grab a strap to hold on to that right ankle, go ahead and grab a strap or a towel. If not, then we're going to pull up into a passive range, this time with the torso facing over that left leg. So we're grabbing onto that right foot with the right hand, driving that knee into the floor. Think about pulling that right hip away from that right knee. So we're lengthening that right leg. Then we're slowly going to let go and try to hold this rotation. So I'm leaning forward, but try not to lean to the side, right? So I'm forward here. I'm using that left hand. You're slowly going to let go of that foot. Try not to drop it. right? We're very slowly taking one finger at a time off the floor, pressing down into the floor with that right knee to hold. We're really gonna cramp up that outer part of the right hip, and then slowly bring the right leg all the way back down. Let's do that one 4 more times. So go ahead and pull up into that passive range. Find that internal rotation. Make sure you're not leaning too far to the left. Then we're gonna let go and try to hold that rotation. 3, 2, 1, coming back down. And let's go 3 more, pulling up into passive range. We're not giving that hip much of a break here, right? So as soon as it hits the floor, we're getting back to that passive range, then activating those tissues before you let go. Hold, 2, 1, slowly come down, and let's go 2 more times, picking up into that internal rotation, not leaning to the left, keeping that spine nice and still. Let go and hold. 4, 3, 2, 1, and down. Let's go 1 more rep, pulling up into passive range, leaning forward, nice tall spine. Let go and hold. Activate those tissues before you release that last finger. 3, 2, and 1. All right, so let's finally slowly come out of this 90-90 position. Grab your yoga block. We're gonna do 2 more drills for that right hip before we move into the left. So you're gonna be in a side lying position and you're gonna adjust the yoga block as needed. But the right leg is gonna be straight out from that hip. So I want that 90-degree angle. This is a very simple lift off. We're working through a larger range of motion here. So leg is at 90 degrees, straight out from the hip, foot is kind of relaxed towards the floor. Now we're gonna flex both feet, make sure those hips are nice and stacked, and you're gonna lift up into that internal rotation. So now we're working internal rotation with the leg in front of you instead of to the side, which was where we were working in that 90-90. So you might find you have a little more range here, and then slowly bring that foot back down. We're just doing 4 more like that, working from this almost externally rotated position into that internal, and hold. Make sure as you're doing this that the right hip doesn't fall forward. You want to keep that right hip pulling back away from that right knee. And slowly bring that foot back down. Let's do that 3 more times. Exhale to lift up and hold. Once again, not giving that hip much of a break at the bottom. We really want to increase that time under tension in the internal rotation. And last 2, exhale to lift up and hold. Slowly come down. Last one, it's as if you have a thumbs up on the top of your thigh and you're turning that thumbs up down towards the floor. That's really where you're gonna find that internal rotation. Hold. And once again, we get a lot of tension on the outside of that hip, and rest. So let's work our hip internal rotation in some hip extension. So you're gonna be in a half kneeling position. The yoga block is going to be behind you, once again adjusting the height as necessary, and it's going to be right behind your knee, and your knee could even be a little bit inside of the block. Okay, so the knee is inside of the block, the foot is outside of the block, the left foot is out in front. As you go through these movements, make sure that this right hip isn't sinking back this way. We want to scoop that tailbone underneath, make sure these glutes are squeezing. So from here, you can place your hands on the front of that left thigh. We're starting in that internal rotation, and we're going to lift up and rotate to external rotation, some slight external rotation on the other side of the block, and bring that foot down, and then lift up, bending that knee. So you might feel some hamstring working here as well, which is great. Back to that internal rotation and down. So the idea is you want to clear that block, and the higher the block is, the harder that movement is going to be. Lift up, hover over and down, and again lifting up. So we're going in and out of this internal rotation in hip extension with your foot behind you. So it's a different orientation than we were just working with the leg in front on your side. Back to internal rotation. We're going to do that 2 more times, lifting up, rotate, bring the foot down. Keep those hips nice and still through this movement. Keep breathing. Last time, lifting up, rotate, down. Last one, up, rotate, and down. All right. So now we got that right hip working. Let's move on to the left. So you can put that yoga block to the side or get that 90-90 set up. Once again, legs are at 90 degrees out from the hips, knees are bent at 90 degrees, we've got those flexed feet, and I'm gonna sink that left hip towards the floor, pulling my chest towards the left knee, grabbing onto the left foot if I can, holding this one a little extra long. We're driving that hip down, we're aiming for that stretch deep within that hip capsule. Take a breath here, and then we're slowly gonna push that left foot into the floor, squeezing those glutes to pull the hip forward to come out of that position. So we're still in internal rotation here, but now we're intensifying that rotation by turning the body towards that leg. At the same time, you're gonna start that tension pulling up, 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 up into that stretch with the foot and the shin. Now they're not actually gonna be able to lift, right? And then you're gonna drive that energy down into the floor to come back out of it. Let's do that 3 more times, pulling into that passive range while actively lifting. And exhale to push out of it. Last 2. Lifting into that rotation, pull that left hip down and back away from that left knee. Exhale, drive the foot down to come back out. And let's go one more time, driving the hip towards the floor, lift that foot and shin, hold. Now let's do some isometrics. So we're gonna try to lengthen that floor between the 2 feet, keeping that hip towards the ground, and then shorten the floor between those 2 feet. Now you'll really feel that intense stretch. Let's do 2 more. Lengthen the floor between those 2 feet, and shorten the floor. Let's do last one, lengthen and hold. Now we're gonna push down into the floor to come back out of that into your 90-90. Now let's lean forward here and pick up that left foot and shin into your passive range. So top of that thigh is going to turn towards the floor. Trying to keep that rib cage nice and square. If you're rotated towards that leg, that's okay. Just fix it as you let go. So as you let go of that leg, try to rotate the body away from it and hold. And slowly come back down. Now, especially as we get into these active ranges of motion, let's go into another rep, you're really gonna notice that there's a difference between one side and the other. Slowly let go. Find that tension before that last finger lets go. Hold. 3, 2, and down. And let's go 3 more. So having one side easier than the other is super normal. It's never gonna be perfectly even, but we wanna try to close that gap as much as possible. Slowly let go. Find that tension. Drive that left knee into the floor. 4, 3, 2, 1. Slowly come down. If you are cramping, it's okay. Just punch it out, get out of that position for a second, and then come right back in, maybe with a little less tension. Those cramps should subside over time in practice. Slowly let go. Try to keep that range of motion. So we're trying not to let that foot drop as much as possible. 3, 2, 1. Slowly come back down. Oh, last one. Pull up into that passive range. Drive that knee into the floor. Find that tension as you slowly let go and hold. Good. 3, 2, 1, and down. Release that tension. Let's go into a little easier movement with a bigger range of motion. So we're gonna go into our sideline position. Left leg is gonna be on top and out in front of you at 90 degrees. We're gonna let that foot kind of hang down towards the floor, so we start from some external rotation and then work into that internal. Make sure those hips are nice and stacked. Drive the knee and the top of the thigh into the block as you lift up and hold. Don't let those hips come out of whack. We want those hips nice and square and stacked. And slowly bring that foot back down. Once again, we're really feeling the outer part of that hip working. Keep driving that knee and top of the thigh into the block. Slowly come back down. And last 3. Exhale as you lift up. Finding that internal rotation of that thigh. Remember, as we're rotating from the hip, 9 times out of 10, the hip is not gonna move. Just that thigh, that upper thigh bone, upper leg bone is rotating within that hip socket. Let's go one more time. lifting up, drive that knee into the block, rotate that femur bone within that hip joint, and slowly lower. All right, we've got one more drill on this left side, so let's set up that yoga block. Here, I'll show you from this angle. So we're in a half kneeling position. The foot's gonna start outside of the knee. So we're already starting in some internal rotation of the hip. The block is gonna be just behind the knee or just outside of it. We want the pelvis and the hips to remain perfectly still. Once again, removing the femur from the hip joint. Okay, you could press your hands into the top of that thigh or keep them on the hips. We're keeping those glutes engaged as we lift up, hover over, bring that leg down, and reverse it, lifting up, hover over, and down. Last 4, lifting up, hover over, and down, and lifting up. You want to make this challenging, but not so challenging that you are moving the spine and the hips all over the place in order to achieve the task. We want to feel the hamstrings working. We want to feel the hip working, but we don't want any compensations happening. Rotate, rotate, rotate. Pull that foot outside the hip. Let's go 2 more. Lift up, rotate. We want to lift and lower with control. Slowly come down. Last one, bend that knee as much as it will go. Rotate from the hip and then reverse it. Bend the knee as far as you can. Rotate that femur from the hip. Keep going, keep going. Bring that foot down and rest. All right. So a quick flow, but I hope you learned something about your hip internal rotation, and I hope you're feeling those hips tomorrow. Thanks so much. If you like this video, please share it, like, and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.